The phone rang at 3 in the morning and I knew it had to be bad news. My mother's voice, cracking with desperation, hit me like a freight train. "Jaden, we need your help. Tyler owes dangerous people $200,000 and they're threatening to kill him. We know you inherited everything from Grandma Dot, and we're begging you to save your brother's life." The same woman who called me a freak and dumped me at my grandmother's house 10 years ago was now asking me to be their savior. I sat in my darkened living room, staring at the phone long after my mother Sandra had hung up. Her words transported me back to the worst day of my life, 10 years earlier, when I was 20 years old and still living with my parents, Robert and Sandra, in their suburban Phoenix home. Back then, my Tourette syndrome was at its worst. The motor tics hit me every few seconds throughout the day. My shoulders would jerk violently backward, my head would twist to the right with a sharp snap, and my left arm would shoot out suddenly like I was trying to catch something that wasn't there. The vocal tics were just as disruptive. I'd clear my throat loudly every 30 seconds, make clicking sounds with my tongue, and occasionally burst out with random words at the most inappropriate moments. My parents had spent years treating me like their personal embarrassment. When friends came over, they'd send me to my room. When we went to restaurants, they'd choose the most isolated tables and shoot me warning glares whenever a tic started. My father, Robert, a proud insurance manager who valued appearances above everything else, would introduce me to his colleagues as our son who has some challenges while avoiding eye contact. My mother, Sandra, obsessed with her social standing in the neighborhood book club and church group, would make excuses about why I couldn't attend family gatherings. The breaking point came on a humid Tuesday morning in July. I'd been struggling to find work for months. Every job interview ended the same way. Employers would see my tics during the conversation, and suddenly they'd remember they had other candidates to consider, or the position was no longer available. My confidence was shattered, and the stress made my tics even worse. That morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table trying to fill out another job application when a particularly bad episode hit. My head snapped to the right repeatedly, while my arm flailed, and I couldn't stop clearing my throat loudly. My father slammed his coffee mug down so hard it cracked. "That's it," Robert shouted, his face red with frustration. "I can't take this anymore. You're 20 years old now. Figure it out yourself." Sandra nodded in agreement, her lips pressed into a thin line of disgust. "We've dealt with this for long enough. It's affecting our mental health, our marriage, our social life. Everything revolves around your problems." "What are you saying?" I asked, though. Deep down, I already knew. "We're taking you to your grandmother's house," Robert announced. "Dorothy can deal with your issues because we're done. We can't have you living here anymore, disrupting our peace." Sandra grabbed my arm roughly. "Pack your things. We're leaving in an hour." The car ride to Grandma Dorothy's small ranch house in Tucson was the longest 90 minutes of my life. My parents sat in the front seat discussing their weekend plans like they were dropping off a burden at the dump. I sat in the back with 2 suitcases and a garbage bag full of my belongings, my tics acting up from the stress and anxiety. When we arrived, Dorothy answered the door with her usual warm smile. But it faded quickly when she saw my tear-stained face and my parents' cold expressions. "We can't handle him anymore," Sandra announced without any greeting. "He's your problem now. Maybe you can deal with his condition because we obviously can't." Robert handed Dorothy a $100 bill like it was a tip for taking their trash. "This should cover food for a week or two while he figures out what he's doing with his life." "You're abandoning your own son?" Dorothy asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. "We're not abandoning him," Sandra replied defensively. "We're giving him space to grow and become independent. Living with us clearly isn't working." Robert was already walking back toward the car. "Come on, Sandra. We have that dinner party with the Hendersons tonight, and I don't want to be late." My mother looked at me one last time, her eyes cold and distant. "Maybe your grandmother can deal with your problems because we're done. Don't call us unless it's an emergency." They drove away without looking back, leaving me standing in Dorothy's doorway with my meager possessions and a heart that felt completely shattered. But then my grandmother wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time in months, I felt safe. "Come inside, sweetheart," she whispered. "Let me make you some tea." Dorothy was 75 years old, but moved with the energy of someone decades younger. Her gray hair was always perfectly styled, and she wore colorful blouses that matched her vibrant personality. Her house smelled like vanilla candles and fresh-baked cookies, a stark contrast to the sterile, unwelcoming atmosphere of my parents' home. She led me to the kitchen and put the kettle on while I slumped into a chair at her small dining table. My tics were going crazy from the emotional stress, but Dorothy didn't even flinch when my arm shot out and knocked over a salt shaker. "Honey, I need to tell you something," she said gently, setting down a steaming mug of chamomile tea. "I was listening from the kitchen when your parents dropped you off. I heard everything they said about you, and I want you to know that I recorded it on my phone." My eyes widened in surprise. "You recorded it?" Dorothy's expression hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "Your parents said things that no child should ever hear from their family. They called you a burden, a freak, an embarrassment. They talked about you like you were defective merchandise they were returning to the store." She pulled out her smartphone and played back their cruel words. Hearing their voices again so casual and dismissive about abandoning their own son made my stomach turn. "They'll regret treating you this way, sweetheart," Dorothy said firmly. "Mark my words. People who abandon family out of selfishness always end up paying for their choices." Over the next few weeks, Dorothy became the parent I'd always needed but never had. She drove me to appointments with Dr. James Matthews, a neurologist who specialized in Tourette syndrome. Dr. Matthews was a kind man in his 50s who explained my condition in terms that made sense and helped me understand that I wasn't broken or defective. "Tourette's affects about 1% of the population," he explained during my first visit. "Your tics are neurological, not behavioral. You can't control them any more than someone can control their heartbeat." Dorothy sat beside me, holding my hand supportively. "Is there anything that can help?" "Stress management, regular exercise, and sometimes medication," Dr. Matthews replied. "But most importantly, Jaden needs to know that his condition doesn't define his worth or limit his potential." For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who accepted me exactly as I was. Dorothy never made me feel ashamed of my tics. When they happened during meals, she'd simply continue our conversation. When I had bad days, she'd bring me hot chocolate and sit with me while I watched old movies. "Your parents don't know what they gave up," she told me one evening as we sat on her back porch watching the sunset. "You're going to do amazing things with your life, Jaden. I can feel it." I wanted to believe her, but after 20 years of being treated like a defective burden, it was hard to imagine a future where I could succeed at anything. 3 years later, my world changed forever when Dorothy suffered a massive heart attack while tending her rose garden on a peaceful Sunday morning. At 78, she had been the picture of health, so her sudden passing left me completely devastated. The funeral service was held at Sacred Heart Catholic Church, where Dorothy had been a devoted member for over 40 years. The church was packed with people whose lives she had touched, but I barely noticed the crowd through my grief. What I did notice was when my parents, Robert and Sandra, walked in during the middle of the service dressed in expensive black clothing and putting on a show of being heartbroken mourners. They hadn't spoken to Dorothy in the 3 years since they dumped me at her house. But now they were dabbing their eyes with tissues and whispering about what a wonderful woman she had been. After the service, everyone gathered at Dorothy's house for a reception. My parents approached me with forced sympathy, asking how I was holding up and making comments about family sticking together during difficult times. Their sudden concern felt hollow and calculated. 2 days later, we all assembled in the office of Benjamin Walsh, Dorothy's longtime attorney. Walsh was a distinguished man in his 60s who had handled Dorothy's legal affairs for over 20 years. His office was lined with law books and family photos, creating an atmosphere of trust and tradition. "Thank you all for coming." Walsh began adjusting his reading glasses. Dorothy's will is straightforward, but there are some specific provisions she wanted me to address. Robert and Sandra sat forward eagerly, clearly expecting to inherit Dorothy's estate. The house alone was worth $800,000, sitting on prime real estate in a desirable Tucson neighborhood. Dorothy had also been a savvy investor, building a portfolio worth over $1.2 million through decades of careful financial planning. Walsh cleared his throat and began reading. I, Dorothy Elizabeth Morrison, being of sound mind and body, hereby bequeath my entire estate to my grandson, Jaden Michael Morrison. This includes my house, all investments bank accounts, and life insurance policy totaling $500,000. The silence in the room was deafening. My parents stared at Walsh like he'd just announced aliens had landed on Earth. "Excuse me," Sandra stammered. "Did you say entire estate?" "That's correct," Walsh confirmed. Jaden inherits everything. The total value is approximately $2.5 million. Robert jumped to his feet, his face purple with rage. This is ridiculous. Dorothy was obviously suffering from dementia. No rational person would leave everything to a grandchild and nothing to their own daughter. I assure you, Dorothy was completely lucid. When she updated her will 18 months ago, Walsh replied calmly. She underwent psychological evaluation to confirm her mental capacity. The will is ironclad. Sandra burst into tears, but they seemed more angry than sad. This isn't fair. We're her family too. Jaden manipulated a sick old woman into changing her will. Actually, Ma, Walsh continued. Dorothy left specific instructions for me to give Jaden a sealed letter and USB drive after the will was read. She wanted him to have these items privately. He handed me a manila envelope with my name written in Dorothy's familiar handwriting. Inside was a 5-page letter that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. That evening alone in Dorothy's house that was now mine, I read her letter with tears streaming down my face. My dearest Jaden, it began. If you're reading this, I'm no longer with you, but I want you to know how proud I am of the man you've become. When your parents abandoned you at my doorstep, I was disgusted by their cruelty, but I was also grateful for the chance to know you properly. The letter went on to explain that Dorothy had been secretly documenting my parents' treatment of me for years. She had recorded phone conversations where they complained about me to relatives, saved text messages where they discussed getting rid of their problem, and even videotaped herself expressing her heartbreak over their behavior. I worked my entire life to build this legacy, she wrote. I saved every penny, invested wisely, and maintained this beautiful home. I refuse to let it go to people who tormented an innocent child. You deserve this inheritance because you are kind, resilient, and loving despite everything they put you through. The USB drive contained hours of evidence. There was the recording from the day they abandoned me, along with dozens of other conversations where they discussed their embarrassment about my condition. There were videos of Dorothy talking directly to the camera, explaining her decision to disinherit her own daughter. Sandra and Robert see Jaden as damaged goods, she said in one video, dated just 6 months before her death. They've never appreciated his intelligence, his kindness, or his strength. They threw him away like garbage, and now they want to benefit from the wealth I built over my dead body. 2 days later, my parents showed up at Dorothy's house unannounced, demanding to contest the will. This is insanity, Robert shouted as I opened the front door. You're 23 years old. What do you know about managing this kind of money? More than you know about being decent parents, I replied, surprised by my own confidence. Sandra pushed past me into the living room. We're going to fight this. No judge will let a will stand when there's clear evidence of manipulation and undue influence. Good luck with that, I said, thinking about the evidence Dorothy had left me. I think you'll find that judges don't look kindly on parents who abandon their disabled children. Over the next 6 months, they hired expensive lawyers and challenged Dorothy's mental capacity, her relationship with me, and the circumstances surrounding the will. But Benjamin Walsh had prepared for this battle. Dorothy's psychological evaluation was thorough. Her medical records showed perfect mental health, and there were multiple witnesses to her lucid decision-making process. During this time, I also met Lisa Chen. Wait, I can't use Chen. I met Lisa Phillips, a beautiful physical therapist who worked at the rehabilitation center where I was volunteering. Lisa was 25 years old with long brown hair and the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. She was helping me process the emotional trauma of Dorothy's death and my parents' legal attacks. "You don't owe them anything," Lisa told me one evening as we sat in Dorothy's garden. "They made their choice when they abandoned you. Now they have to live with the consequences." The legal battle ended exactly as Dorothy had predicted. The will was upheld, my parents were ordered to pay court costs, and I officially became a millionaire at 24 years old. But more importantly, I finally understood that Dorothy's love had been real, and her belief in me was about to change everything. 2 years after inheriting Dorothy's estate, I had transformed from an abandoned son into a successful entrepreneur, though the journey wasn't easy. The first thing I did was pay off the student loans I'd accumulated during my 2 years at community college. Dorothy's inheritance gave me the freedom to pursue my education without financial stress. I enrolled in a coding boot camp at Phoenix Technical Institute drawn to programming because I discovered something remarkable about my condition. When I was focused intensely on computer code, my tics almost disappeared completely. The hyper-focus that came with Tourette's syndrome, which had been such a burden in social situations, became my greatest asset when debugging complex programs. I could sit for 8 hours straight, completely absorbed in solving coding problems that stumped other students. My instructor at the boot camp was Sarah Phillips, a successful software developer in her 30s, who had built multiple applications for major corporations. Sarah also had ADHD and understood the unique advantages that neurological differences could provide in the tech world. "Your brain works differently than most people's," she explained during one of our mentoring sessions. "That hyperfocus ability you have is incredibly rare and valuable in this field." Sarah was right. While other students struggled with the tedious process of finding bugs in thousands of lines of code, I could zero in on problems with laser-like precision. My condition, which had made me feel like a freak for 24 years, was actually a superpower in the programming world. After completing the boot camp, I started freelancing from Dorothy's house, taking on small projects to build my reputation. Word spread quickly in the Phoenix tech community about the young programmer who could solve problems that stumped entire development teams. My big break came when TechFlow Solutions, a major software company based in Scottsdale, contacted me with a crisis. Their main customer database system had developed a critical bug that was causing random data corruption. The problem was costing them over $50,000 per day in lost business, and their team of 12 senior developers had been working around the clock for 3 weeks without finding the source. "We've heard you have a unique approach to debugging," said Marcus Peterson, TechFlow's chief technology officer, during our phone interview. "We're willing to pay $25,000 if you can identify and fix this problem within 72 hours. I accepted the challenge immediately. For the next 3 days, I barely slept or ate, completely absorbed in analyzing hundreds of thousands of lines of code. My tics were minimal during this period because my brain was in its element, hyper-focused and operating at peak efficiency. On the second night at 3 in the morning, I found it, buried deep in a legacy module that no one had touched in years, was a single line of code with a memory allocation error that triggered randomly based on system load. The bug was so subtle and intermittent that conventional debugging methods would never have caught it. When I called Marcus Peterson with the solution, he couldn't believe it. "You found a problem that our entire team missed," he asked incredulously. "Sometimes it takes a different kind of brain to see what others can't," I replied. TechFlow was so impressed that they offered me a full-time position as a senior debugging specialist at $150,000 per year plus equity in the company. I was 26 years old and earning more money annually than my father Robert had ever made in his entire career. But I had bigger plans. Instead of taking the job, I used my newfound reputation to launch my own consulting business, which I named Persistent Solutions. The name was a reference to the persistence that came naturally with my neurological condition, the same trait that had driven my parents crazy but now made me incredibly successful. Within 18 months, Persistent Solutions was generating over $400,000 in annual revenue. I specialized in solving complex programming problems for major corporations, often fixing issues that their internal teams couldn't resolve. My client list included banks, healthcare systems, and government contractors who needed someone with my unique ability to hyper-focus on intricate technical challenges. The business success was gratifying, but the personal growth was even more meaningful. My tics had become less frequent and severe as my stress levels decreased and my confidence grew. I was taking better care of my health, exercising regularly, and maintaining a balanced diet. Dr. Matthews was amazed by my progress during our quarterly checkups. Success and self-acceptance are powerful medicine, he observed. When you're not constantly fighting your condition, it becomes much more manageable. My relationship with Lisa was also flourishing. She had moved in with me at Dorothy's house and we were talking about marriage. Lisa loved me exactly as I was including my tics, and she was incredibly proud of my business success. "You're proof that different doesn't mean broken," she told me one evening as we watched the sunset from Dorothy's back porch. "Your parents had no idea what they were throwing away." During this period, my parents occasionally reached out, usually around holidays or birthdays. They'd leave voicemails asking how I was doing and mentioning that they'd love to reconnect as a family. I never returned their calls, but I heard through relatives that Robert was still working part-time as an insurance consultant, and Sandra had joined several social committees in their retirement community. I also heard whispers about my brother Tyler's increasing gambling problems. He'd lost his job as an insurance adjuster after being caught placing bets during work hours, and he'd been borrowing money from friends and family to cover his losses. But these were distant concerns that didn't affect my daily life. My focus remained on building my business and planning a future with Lisa. I was finally living the successful, fulfilling life that Dorothy had always believed I could achieve. Then came that phone call at 3 a.m. that would test everything I'd built. After hanging up with my mother, Sandra, I couldn't go back to sleep. Her desperate words kept echoing in my mind as I sat in my home office staring out at the Phoenix cityscape in the pre-dawn darkness. I hadn't spoken to Tyler in over 8 years, not since the day our parents abandoned me. He had been the golden child, the perfect son who never caused embarrassment or required special accommodation. While I struggled with tics and social awkwardness, Tyler breezed through high school as a star basketball player and class president. He went to Arizona State University on an athletic scholarship and graduated with a business degree that our parents proudly displayed on their living room wall. But now, according to Sandra's frantic phone call, Tyler was in life-threatening danger. The next morning, I called Sandra back to get the full story. Her voice was hoarse from crying, and she sounded like she'd aged 10 years overnight. "It started small," she explained. "Tyler began playing online poker during college. We thought it was just harmless fun, something to do with his friends. But after he graduated and got the job at Mountain View Insurance, the gambling got worse. Tyler had started with $20 online games, then moved to sports betting, placing increasingly larger wagers on football and basketball games. When online gambling became too limiting, he discovered underground poker games and illegal betting operations around Phoenix. He told us he was winning money," Sandra continued. "He bought a new car, moved into an expensive apartment, took vacations to Las Vegas. We thought his insurance job was going really well." The truth was that Tyler had been living off credit cards and loans, using his wins to pay minimum balances while his losses mounted exponentially. When his gambling debts became unmanageable, he started borrowing against his house, his car, and eventually his retirement accounts. The final blow came when Tyler's employer discovered he was accessing online gambling sites during work hours and placing bets using company computers. Mountain View Insurance fired him immediately and reported his misconduct to the State Insurance Commission, making it nearly impossible for him to work in the industry again. He lost everything, Sandra sobbed. The house, the car, his job, his savings. And then he made the worst mistake of all. Desperate to win back his losses, Tyler had sought out Marcus Rodriguez, a loan shark who operated illegal gambling operations throughout the Phoenix metropolitan area. Marcus was known for offering high-stakes loans to gamblers who had exhausted traditional lending options, but his interest rates were astronomical, and his collection methods were brutal. Tyler borrowed $50,000 from Marcus, convinced that one big win would solve all his problems. Instead, he lost it all in a single weekend at an underground poker tournament in Scottsdale. The debt has grown to over $200,000 with interest and penalties. Robert's voice came through the speakerphone. He sounded defeated and exhausted. Marcus gave Tyler 30 days to pay in full or what I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Or Tyler disappears permanently, Sandra whispered. Marcus showed him photos of other people who couldn't pay. We're talking about professional criminals, Jaden. These aren't empty threats. What made the situation even worse was that my parents had co-signed some of Tyler's earlier loans, thinking they were helping him through a temporary rough patch. Now they were legally liable for debts they couldn't possibly pay on Robert's modest pension. Our house is worthless, Robert admitted. We took out a reverse mortgage 5 years ago to fund our retirement. We have maybe $10,000 in savings and some old jewelry that might be worth a few thousand more. I felt a complex mixture of emotions as I listened to their desperation. Part of me felt vindicated that the family that had treated me like garbage was now begging for my help. But another part of me, the part that Dorothy had nurtured with love and acceptance, felt genuine concern for Tyler's safety. "Why are you calling me?" I asked. "You made it very clear 8 years ago that I wasn't part of this family anymore." Sandra's voice broke completely. "We know we were terrible parents to you. We know we said unforgivable things and abandoned you when you needed us most. But Tyler will die if you don't help us." There was a long silence before Robert spoke again. "We've heard about your business success. People in town talk about how well you're doing. We know you inherited Dorothy's money, and we know you've built something impressive with your life. So you want me to save the brother who watched you destroy my self-esteem for 20 years and never said a word in my defense?" "Tyler was just a kid then," Sandra protested. "He didn't understand what was happening. But he's your brother Jaden. He's family." I told them I needed time to think and hung up the phone. Lisa found me sitting in Dorothy's garden, the same spot where my grandmother used to reassure me that everything would work out. "You're not seriously considering giving the money, are you?" Lisa asked, sitting beside me on the stone bench. "I don't know," I admitted. "Tyler might be a gambling addict who made terrible choices, but he doesn't deserve to be murdered over it." Lisa took my hand gently. "Your parents abandoned you when you needed them most. They called you horrible names and treated you like you were defective. Now they want you to risk your financial security to solve problems they helped create." She was right. But the situation was more complicated than simple revenge. If Tyler was really in danger from violent criminals, could I live with myself if something happened to him and I had the power to prevent it? Dr. Matthews offered his perspective during an emergency session the next day. "You need to consider what's best for your mental health and well-being," he advised. "These people caused you significant trauma during your formative years. Re-engaging with them could potentially trigger a relapse in your symptoms." But he also acknowledged the moral complexity of the situation. At the same time, if your brother's life is genuinely threatened and you have the means to help, you'll need to live with whatever decision you make. Against Lisa's advice and my own better judgment, I agreed to meet my parents in person for the first time in 8 years. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Central Phoenix neutral territory where I could leave if the conversation became too uncomfortable. When I walked into the coffee shop, I almost didn't recognize them. Robert looked much older than his 62 years with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. Sandra appeared frail and worn down, her once pristine appearance replaced by obvious stress and worry. For several minutes, we sat in awkward silence, stirring our drinks and avoiding eye contact. Finally, Robert spoke. "You look good, Jaden, successful. We heard you started your own business." "I did," I replied simply. Sandra reached across the table like she wanted to touch my hand, then seemed to think better of it. "We owe you an apology, a huge apology. We were wrong about everything. Wrong about how we treated you, wrong about what we said, wrong about abandoning you." Hearing those words, which I had fantasized about for years, should have felt satisfying. Instead, they felt hollow and calculated. "We've grown as people," Robert added. "We understand now that we let our own fears and prejudices hurt you terribly. If we could go back and change things, we would." They spent the next hour detailing Tyler's situation and their own financial helplessness. They showed me threatening text messages from Marcus Rodriguez, photos of Tyler's bruised face from a warning beating, and documentation of their mounting debts. "We're not asking for ourselves," Sandra insisted. "We're asking you to save your brother's life." As I listened to their apparent remorse and desperate pleas, something inside me began to soften. Maybe people really could change. Maybe 8 years had given them perspective on their mistakes. Maybe this crisis could be the beginning of rebuilding our family relationships. I told them I would consider helping Tyler, but I needed to verify the situation independently and think through the implications. "Thank you," Robert said, tears in his eyes. "Thank you for even considering it after everything we put you through." As I drove home, I found myself actually believing that this might be a chance for healing and redemption. Maybe my success had given me the power to save Tyler and prove that I was the bigger person. I had no idea that I was walking directly into another trap. Over the next few days, I threw myself into investigating Tyler's situation. If I was going to risk $200,000 of my hard-earned money, I needed to verify that the threat was real and that my parents were being honest about their circumstances. My first step was researching Marcus Rodriguez. Using my connections in the Phoenix business community and some discreet inquiries through former clients who had law enforcement connections, I learned that Marcus was indeed a legitimate threat. He operated a sophisticated loan sharking operation that extended credit to desperate gamblers, then used intimidation and violence to collect. Marcus had been arrested 3 times for assault, but never convicted due to witness intimidation. His operation was connected to several mysterious disappearances of people who had defaulted on their debts. The photos my parents had shown me of Tyler's bruised face weren't theatrical makeup, they were real evidence of what happened to people who crossed Marcus. Next, I verified my parents' financial situation. Robert's pension records showed he was receiving about $2,800 per month from his former employer, barely enough to cover their basic living expenses. Their house was indeed encumbered by a reverse mortgage that left them with no equity. Sandra's medical bills from a recent bout with pneumonia had drained most of their savings. On the surface, everything they'd told me appeared to be accurate. The third step was talking to Tyler directly. I drove to my parents' house on a Saturday afternoon, the first time I'd been there since they'd kicked me out 8 years earlier. Walking through the front door felt surreal and emotionally charged. Tyler was sitting in the living room looking nothing like the confident young man I remembered. He'd lost significant weight, his clothes were wrinkled and stained, and his left eye was still swollen from Marcus's warning visit. When he saw me, he broke down completely. "Jaden, I'm so sorry," he sobbed. "I'm sorry for everything. For not defending you when Mom and Dad treated you terribly. For acting like you didn't exist after they kicked you out? For letting this gambling addiction destroy my life and put everyone in danger? His remorse seemed genuine and raw. He told me about the progression of his addiction, how the initial small wins had made him believe he was smarter than other gamblers, how the losses had driven him to take increasingly desperate risks. "I know I don't deserve your help," he said, "but I'm begging you to save my life. I'll do anything to make it right. I'll go to treatment. I'll work for you for free. I'll spend the rest of my life paying you back." As I listened to Tyler's breakdown and saw the genuine terror in his eyes, my resolve began to weaken. This was my brother, regardless of our complicated history. He was clearly suffering and genuinely afraid for his life. My parents reinforced his pleas with their own emotional appeals. They talked about starting over as a family, about learning from their mistakes, about Tyler getting professional help for his addiction. They painted a picture of reconciliation and healing that was incredibly appealing after years of estrangement. "We could be a real family again," Sandra said, tears streaming down her face. "I know we don't deserve forgiveness, but people can change. We've all learned and grown from our mistakes." Robert nodded emphatically. "This crisis has made us realize what's truly important. Family, love, supporting each other through difficult times." The more they talked about redemption and fresh starts, the more I found myself believing them. Maybe trauma and consequences had genuinely transformed them into better people. Maybe this was my opportunity to be the bigger person, to show that success hadn't made me vindictive or cruel. I told them I was seriously considering paying Tyler's debt as a one-time bailout, but I needed 48 hours to discuss it with Lisa and make a final decision. "Thank you," Tyler said, hugging me for the first time since we were children. "Thank you for even considering it. You're a better person than I ever was." As I prepared to leave, I decided to use the bathroom before driving back to Tucson. As I walked down the hallway, I could hear my family's voices from the kitchen, and something in their tone made me pause and listen. What I heard next shattered any illusions I might have had about their transformation. "He's falling for it," Sandra whispered excitedly. "Keep playing up the guilt and the family reunification angle." "I think he'll actually pay the $200,000, Robert replied quietly. "Did you see how he reacted when Tyler started crying?" Tyler's voice was the most shocking of all. "If he doesn't pay, we move to Plan B. We tell everyone in his business network that he's mentally unstable because of his condition. We contact his girlfriend's family and explain that he's got defective genes." "That's brilliant," Sandra agreed. "Rich people hate being associated with genetic problems. Once we plant doubt about his mental stability, his clients will start questioning whether they can trust him with their projects." My hands started shaking as I pulled out my phone and began recording their conversation. "We should demand monthly payments too," Robert suggested. "Not just a one-time bailout. If he's making $400,000 a year, he can afford to support his family." "Absolutely," Sandra replied. "We'll frame it as helping Tyler with ongoing recovery expenses or family financial support. Once he pays the first time, he'll keep paying to avoid scandal." Tyler laughed quietly, and the sound made my stomach turn. "I can't believe he bought the whole reformed family act. 8 years of success, and he's still the same gullible freak who desperately wants mommy and daddy's approval." "Don't call him a freak," Sandra scolded. "He's our golden goose now." I stood in that hallway listening to them plan my financial exploitation and emotional manipulation, feeling the same devastation I'd experienced 8 years earlier when they'd abandoned me. But this time, instead of breaking me down, their betrayal filled me with cold, calculating anger. They hadn't changed at all. They were still the same selfish, cruel people who saw me as either a burden or a resource to be exploited. The only difference was that now they needed my money instead of wanting me gone. As I walked back into the living room, I managed to compose my expression and act like nothing had happened. "I'll have an answer for you within 48 hours. I told them, shaking Robert's hand and accepting another hug from Tyler. "Thank you, brother," Tyler said, his voice full of fake emotion. "You're saving my life." I drove home in silence, my mind already working on a plan that would give them exactly what they deserved while protecting Tyler from the genuine threat he faced. They wanted to exploit my success and destroy my reputation if I didn't comply. They were about to learn that success had given me resources and connections they couldn't imagine. The game was about to change completely. Instead of calling my parents within 48 hours as promised, I spent the next week quietly orchestrating a counterattack that would expose their manipulation while solving Tyler's problem through entirely different means. My first move was contacting Marcus Rodriguez directly. Using my business connections, I arranged a meeting through an intermediary who vouched for my legitimacy. Marcus agreed to meet at Osteria, an upscale Italian restaurant in Scottsdale, apparently intrigued by the idea of dealing with a successful entrepreneur instead of desperate debtors. Marcus Rodriguez was not what I expected. Instead of the stereotypical loan shark, he was a well-dressed man in his 40s who spoke with the vocabulary of an MBA graduate. He ordered an expensive bottle of wine and discussed market trends while we ate our appetizers. "Tyler Morrison is your brother?" he asked after I explained my interest in his debt. "Unfortunately, yes," I replied. Marcus chuckled. "He's been nothing but trouble since the day I met him. Lies, constantly makes promises he can't keep, shows no respect for the business relationship we established." I was surprised when Marcus pulled out a tablet and showed me detailed documentation of Tyler's borrowing history. "Your brother originally borrowed $50,000 with clear terms for repayment. He signed contracts, provided collateral information, and agreed to specific payment schedules. According to Marcus's records, Tyler had repeatedly violated their agreement by missing payments, lying about his employment status, and even attempting to forge documents showing income he didn't have. The debt grew to $200,000 because he kept requesting extensions and additional loans while providing false information," Marcus explained. "He even used your parents' identities to secure additional credit lines they don't know about." My eyes widened. "He committed identity theft against our parents." 3 separate loans totaling $65,000. Marcus confirmed, showing me the forged documents. "Your parents are in deeper legal trouble than they realize." This revelation changed everything. Tyler hadn't just gambled away his own life, he'd committed federal crimes that could send him to prison and destroy our parents financially. But Marcus surprised me again with his next proposal. "I'm not actually interested in hurting your brother," he said. "Violence is bad for business and attracts unwanted attention from law enforcement. I'm interested in recovering my money and making an example that discourages other clients from defaulting." He leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "I've researched your background since you requested this meeting. Persistent Solutions has an impressive client list, and your personal story is quite remarkable. Someone who overcame your challenges to build that level of success has character." Marcus proposed a deal that was both fair and strategic. Instead of requiring a lump sum payment, he would reduce Tyler's total debt to $100,000 in exchange for Tyler working for his legitimate construction company for 5 years. Tyler would receive a standard salary, but a portion of his wages would go toward debt repayment until the balance was cleared. "I run several legal businesses in addition to my lending operation," Marcus explained. "Good employees are hard to find, and someone who's learned hard lessons about consequences might become a valuable worker." The arrangement would remove Tyler from the gambling environment, give him honest work with decent pay, and gradually eliminate his debt through labor rather than family bailout. It was a better solution than anything I could have imagined. "Why would you make this deal?" I asked. Marcus smiled. "Because having a relationship with a successful business owner like yourself could be valuable for my legitimate enterprises. And because your brother will serve as a walking example to other clients about the consequences of defaulting." I agreed to Marcus's proposal, but I had one additional request. I wanted legal documentation proving Tyler's identity theft against our parents, and I wanted Marcus to cooperate if law enforcement needed to investigate those crimes. Absolutely, Marcus agreed. I have no interest in being associated with identity theft. That crosses lines I don't cross. With Tyler's immediate safety secured and his debt problem solved, I moved to phase 2 of my plan, exposing my parents' manipulation to our extended family and community. I spent the next few days editing the recording I'd made of their kitchen conversation, removing any references to Marcus or specific details about Tyler's situation that could interfere with the legal resolution we'd arranged. What remained was 43 minutes of audio clearly showing my parents planning to exploit my success and destroy my reputation if I didn't comply with their demands. I uploaded the edited recording to social media with a simple caption, "When terrible parents beg money from the child they abandoned." I included enough context to explain my medical condition, their abandonment 8 years earlier, and their current manipulation attempts. The video went viral within hours. Local news stations picked up the story, and it spread across Facebook and Twitter with thousands of shares and comments. The Phoenix community, where my parents had built their social reputation over decades, was horrified by the audio evidence of their callousness and greed. Sandra was banned from her book club and asked to resign from 3 different church committees. Robert lost his part-time consulting position when the recording reached his former colleagues. Their neighbors in the retirement community began avoiding them, and several family members publicly supported me while distancing themselves from my parents. The social consequences were swift and devastating, but they were nothing compared to what happened when the FBI investigated Tyler's identity theft crimes. 2 weeks after my meeting with Marcus, federal agents arrested Tyler at my parents' house. The charges included wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud related to the forged loan documents. My parents learned for the first time that Tyler had been using their personal information to obtain credit they knew nothing about. We had no idea. Sandra sobbed during a frantic phone call. He used our social security numbers and forged our signatures. We're victims too. But their victimization didn't protect them from the financial consequences. They were jointly liable for the $65,000 in fraudulent loans money they had no ability to repay. The final blow came when their house was seized as part of the federal investigation. The reverse mortgage company discovering the property was involved in federal crimes accelerated their claim and forced an immediate sale to recover their investment. Within 30 days, my parents went from living comfortably in their retirement community to surviving on Robert's pension in a small apartment facing bankruptcy and social ostracism. Tyler was offered a plea deal that included 5 years of supervised release restitution payments and mandatory participation in gambling addiction treatment. As part of his plea agreement, he was allowed to work for Marcus's construction company, meaning the original debt settlement arrangement remained in effect. Everything had worked out exactly as I'd planned, but the best part was yet to come. 6 months after my counterattack had dismantled my family's manipulation scheme, I was sitting in Dorothy's garden with Lisa when Tyler called me for the first time since his arrest. "Jaden, I need to talk to you." He said, his voice completely different from the fake emotion he'd used during our reconciliation meeting. "Not about money or favors. I need to apologize for real this time." We met at a small diner near the construction site where Tyler was working for Marcus's crew. He looked healthier than I'd seen him in years, with sun-darkened skin and the muscular build of someone who'd been doing physical labor. More importantly, there was something different in his eyes, a clarity that hadn't been there during our previous conversation. "I've been going to Gamblers Anonymous meetings 3 times a week," he began. "Part of the program involves taking responsibility for the harm you've caused to other people. I need to make amends to you, not because I want something, but because you deserve to hear this." For the next hour, Tyler detailed years of behavior I'd never fully understood. He described watching our parents emotionally abuse me throughout our childhood and teenage years, knowing it was wrong but saying nothing because it meant he remained their favorite. He talked about the relief he'd felt when they abandoned me because it removed any pressure for him to defend me. I was a coward, he said simply. I watched them destroy your self-esteem and call you horrible names. And I never said a word because it was easier to be the golden child than to do what was right. He also revealed details about our parents' manipulation that I hadn't known. The whole reconciliation scene had been rehearsed for days, with Sandra coaching Tyler on what emotional triggers would be most effective with me. They'd researched my business success through community connections and calculated exactly how much money I could afford to give them. When we heard you'd inherited Grandma Dorothy's money and built a successful business, Mom said you were our retirement insurance policy, Tyler continued. The plan was to get you to pay my gambling debts, then hit you up for regular monthly support disguised as family assistance. But the most meaningful part of our conversation came when Tyler talked about his work with Marcus's construction crew. I've never had a job where I built anything before, he said with genuine pride. Insurance work was all about processing other people's losses. Gambling was all about destroying value. But construction work means I'm creating something useful that will last. Tyler had discovered that he actually enjoyed the physical labor and the satisfaction of completing tangible projects. Marcus had become an unexpected mentor, teaching him about accountability, work ethic, and the value of keeping commitments. Marcus told me something that changed my perspective, Tyler said. He said that people who've lost everything and survived can become the most reliable employees because they understand consequences in ways that lucky people never will. Tyler was halfway through paying off his debt through wage garnishment, attending counseling sessions for gambling addiction, and living in shared housing with other people in recovery. For the first time in his adult life, he was building something instead of tearing it down. I don't expect forgiveness, he concluded. I don't expect a relationship. But I want you to know that watching you succeed despite everything our parents did to you has taught me what real strength looks like. As Tyler and I were finishing our conversation, my phone rang with a call from Sandra. I almost declined it, but curiosity made me answer. Jaden, please don't hang up, she said immediately. I'm calling to tell you about the scholarship. What scholarship? The Dorothy Morrison Scholarship for Students with Neurological Differences. She said, her voice thick with emotion. I saw the announcement in the Phoenix Business Journal. You established a $50,000 annual scholarship in your grandmother's name. 3 months earlier, I had indeed created a scholarship fund designed to help young people with conditions like Tourette's, syndrome ADHD, and autism pursue education and career training. The program provided financial support and mentorship for students who showed academic potential despite neurological challenges. I wanted to call and tell you how proud Dorothy would be, Sandra continued, and how ashamed I am of the way we treated you. For the first time in our conversation, Sandra's voice sounded genuinely broken rather than manipulative. We lost everything, Jaden. Our house, our social standing, our relationships with most of the family. But the worst loss is knowing that we threw away a son who grew up to be the kind of person who helps other people facing the same challenges we made worse for you. She paused, clearly struggling with her words. Robert and I are seeing a counselor now. We're trying to understand how we became the kind of people who could abandon their own child. The therapist says we were dealing with our own fears and inadequacies by making you the problem instead of getting you the support you needed. I listened without responding, not sure what to say or feel. We know you'll probably never forgive us, Sandra continued. We know we don't deserve forgiveness. But we want you to know that we finally understand what we lost when we turned our backs on you. After she hung up, I sat in my car outside the diner for a long time, processing the conversation. Part of me felt vindicated that they finally understood the magnitude of their mistakes. But mostly I felt sad for all of us about the family relationships that could have been but were now impossible to repair. That evening, Lisa and I were planning our wedding, which was scheduled for the following spring. She had proposed to me 6 months earlier, saying she wanted to marry someone who understood that love means accepting people completely, including the parts that others might see as flaws. Your parents spent 20 years trying to convince you that your condition made you less valuable, she said as we looked through wedding venue brochures. But your Tourette's didn't make you broken. It made you uniquely strong, uniquely focused, and uniquely capable of building the life you wanted. She was right. The hyper-focus that had made social situations difficult during my childhood had become the foundation of my professional success. The persistence that had driven my parents crazy had enabled me to solve problems that defeated other people. The different way my brain processed information had turned out to be an advantage rather than a disability. 1 year later, Lisa and I were married in Dorothy's garden, surrounded by friends, colleagues, and chosen family members who loved and supported us. Tyler served as my best man, clean and sober, and genuinely committed to rebuilding his life. Marcus Rodriguez attended as Tyler's guest, having become a positive influence and employer. My parents were not invited, but they sent a card with a simple message. We're proud of the man you became, despite us not because of us. As I stood in the garden where Dorothy had first told me I would do amazing things with my life, I realized that everything she'd predicted had come true. The people who couldn't accept me at my worst hadn't deserved me at my best. Being abandoned by the wrong people had put me exactly where I belonged, surrounded by those who loved all of me, including the parts others called different. My tics hadn't made me broken. They'd made me uniquely strong. That strength had enabled me to build a life so successful that the people who once called me worthless had come crawling back for mercy. But more importantly, that strength had enabled me to help other people facing similar challenges to create opportunities for young people who might otherwise be told they're not good enough, and to build a legacy that honored the grandmother who saw my potential when no one else could. Looking back, I wouldn't change anything about my journey. The abandonment, the struggle, even the final betrayal and manipulation had all been necessary parts of becoming the person I was meant to be. Sometimes the greatest gift terrible parents can give their children is teaching them exactly who they don't want to become. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between helping family members who treated you poorly and protecting yourself from further harm? What would you do if the people who abandoned you came back asking for help? How do you balance forgiveness with self-preservation when dealing with toxic family relationships? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others who might be facing similar situations find it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming adversity and building success despite difficult circumstances. And most importantly, please share this story with anyone who might need to hear that being different doesn't mean being less valuable, and that sometimes the people who reject us are doing us the biggest favor of our lives by forcing us to find our real strength. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to respond and what you build from the pieces of your broken beginning.